So let's start on page 13. Can we go with Nicole for number 1 in the middle?
Here's an example.
Okay, so let's give this a shot. Again, president of GCC is interested in knowing should we offer more evening classes or more day classes. So let's get some data right now. You're going to decide whether you prefer to take classes in the day or in the evening. Raise your hand. You have to pick one of these two. Everybody clear on what they're picking, day or evening? All right, raise your hand if you prefer classes in the day. Super. Raise your hand if you prefer classes at night. One out of about 20. Okay. Right, so then I can go to Bob, our president, and I can say, look, only 1 out of 20 GCC students prefers classes during the evening. Frankly, I think we should just shut down the evening program. There's nothing going on there. Let's just offer everything in the day. What is wrong with the study that I just passed along to Bob? Your day students, right? Maybe you are here because you prefer taking classes during the day. Right? Maybe Greg wants to take classes in the evening, but he's got a scheduling conflict, and so he can't take a class in the evening, so he's here even though he'd rather be here at night. So you really have to be careful when you hear these kinds of results. Only 1 out of 20 GCC students prefers taking classes at night. You have to ask a lot of questions before you buy into what that person is selling. And so today we're going to see a lot of vocabulary that just basically leads us to asking a lot of questions about these kinds of studies. All right, so let's go to number 2A. We'll go to Mary. Okay, so I'm interested in knowing what the population is, or the target population for the evening classes study. The population is not the 20 people in the room. Who is Bob, our president, trying to get information about? All GCC students, right? Not just you 20 that happen to be here. So the population in this case is all GCC students. Okay, we'll go to Grace for part B. Okay, so here's another vocabulary word, N value, as Grace just read to us. It's just the number of things that are in the population. So ballpark, does anybody happen to know how big this population is? Yeah, about 2,000. I haven't looked at it in 6 months. It was like 2,300 when I looked at it last. We'll say about 2,000. So in our case, N is roughly 2,000 students. And the reason that that number is important is that that number is going to dictate how many people I really need to ask to get a general feel for what those 2,000 students want. The best thing to do would be to ask all 2,000 students, hey, do you prefer day classes or night classes? That would be the most information I could get. But that information would be really costly. It would take a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of resources to go out and poll every single GCC student. So instead what we do is we poll a smaller group of GCC students, say you 20. Okay, so if there's 20 of you and 2,000 students, do you feel like that's enough? Okay, so some people are saying that's just not enough. And so, how many people you need to poll to try to get a representation of the whole population depends on the N value, right? So maybe you feel like 100 students would be enough, or 500 students would be enough, maybe. But would it be enough to poll 500 Americans? Hey, which president do you, or who are you going to vote for? Asking 500 Americans out of 320 million Americans, that's probably not good enough. So again, the N value is going to determine how many people we really need to ask to try to get a good sense of what the whole population feels. Okay, let's go to C. Tim? What did we just do here? Was this a census or a survey? This was a survey. We didn't poll every GCC student, only some of you guys. We'll go to Lucas for the next part. Okay, so this is in, I'm going to show my my lack of historical knowledge, but is it in the Constitution? Where does it talk about the census being done every 10 years? Where is it? Okay, so it's in the Constitution. Is that right? Okay. Right. So we got to figure out how the representation is going to happen in our government. We mentioned that Massachusetts lost one of our electoral college votes based on the data. Our population went down, so we lost some representation. Other populations went up and they gained. And so it is a law here in the US that every 10 years we have a census. And so just a couple of years ago, you should have been counted. So you literally should have filled in a piece of paper that got mailed to your home. It says, hey, I live here, here's my name, here's my age, some other information about you. If you live with your folks, then your parents were supposed to put something on there that says so-and-so lives with me, here are the ages of all the people that are living with me. So that is the census, and that is, in theory, the most accurate way to get information about the population. This is me speaking off the record a little bit. But I read a book a few years ago by William Poundstone. I'll get the title of it for you if you're interested. But it talked about the idea that even though a census is in theory supposed to give you the most accurate information because you poll everybody, it actually does a very poor job of giving us a sense of accurate demographics here in the United States. There are typical groups who are underrepresented. Did everybody fill out? Is there anybody who just ignored the census information that came? It's okay to right. So we have people who got the stuff, who got the mail, right? And then probably got several reminders, hey, you haven't given us the information yet, and just didn't respond. Fine. There are certain groups who typically are underrepresented when we do this idea of a census. And so I'm not going to describe which groups those are, but I'm going to say that we've got Republicans and Democrats. One group of them, and I'm not even going to say which one it is, really likes the census because they like underrepresenting these certain groups of people. And the other group says, hey, a census is not giving us an accurate representation because there are certain kinds of people who just simply don't respond to the census. And so it turns out we can get a more accurate sense of the demographics here in the US by doing a survey like we did here. But you got to pick a good representative cross-section of the US population. If you can poll a small number of people, much smaller than the 300 million that in theory we polled, but if you do it in such a way that you got kind of a random cross-section, a really good diverse population that represents the US, you actually get more accurate information than the census. And another downside about the census is that it is really costly. I think it cost each of us $20 to have that census done. I did a division, like I found out what the total cost of the census was, divided by 300 million Americans, and it's something like 20 bucks each. So anyway, we talked about here, maybe a census of the GCC population isn't reasonable because it would take time and money. So we'll do a smaller group, a survey. Okay, Lucas, you read, didn't you? Okay, we'll go to Greg for D. Okay, so the sample again is just the people that you actually ask. So who was the sample of our study? It was you, the 20 students in the room. "20 students in today's class. You guys are the sample. Okay, so now we have two words that you're going to need to distinguish. There's population and there's sample. Which one is the big set of people? Population. Small set, sample. Now you guys have used the word sample before outside of math class to mean this same thing. What's a blood sample? Perfect. Yes? How do we get information about our blood? Do we drain the whole body, look at every single molecule of blood, and then we'll put it back in, hopefully not too long down the road? No, we take a sample, little small section of blood, and hopefully it represents the blood that's in your body, right? What's it called? What does it mean when a musician samples some music? They take a piece. They take somebody else's song, they take a small piece of it, and they put it into their song. That's sampling, right? They don't take the whole other song and copy it, they take a small piece of it. So the word sample, you guys already know, it means small. And if it helps, sample and small start with the letter S. So sample is small. Okay, E talks about sampling, which is the name given to the process of choosing a sample. So in my case, I didn't work very hard to do my survey. I happened to just look at the people right here in front of me, and I said, hey, you guys are going to be part of my survey, right? And there are other ways that I could have done this. So the different ways that you can choose the people to be in the survey, it's called sampling. So let's take a look at each of these things. We'll go to Gary for F. You guys agree it was pretty convenient for me to just come in. I didn't have to do any work. I just asked the people right here in front of me. So it's easy to do. It's also probably the worst thing you can do if you're trying to get accurate information. You guys recognized right away, by virtue of being in a day class, you probably have a preference for day classes. So the information I got here is fairly useless because I just did this convenient thing for me. All right, we'll go to Morgan for simple random sampling. Okay, so that's the goal right there. Instead of asking the 20 people that happen to be in front of me, I should really have a list of every student at GCC. I should roll some dice or flip some coins, do something to randomly pick names in this list. I'm not going to make sure I pick a certain number of guys and girls. I'm not going to make sure I pick a certain number of traditional age college students and some older students. I'm not going to make sure I do anything. It's going to be completely random. And it turns out that's the best way to get a good sense of what the general population is interested in, okay? All right, so that's simple random sampling. Let's go to the next one. Gina? Okay, so in this case, I said I wasn't going to look at the gender of the people. If I do a simple random sample, I'm just randomly pulling names out of a hat, right? Every student at GCC should have the same chance of being part of my study. A quota sample would be my way of trying to force the people that I asked the question to be representative of something. So it turns out that the male-female ratio here is not 1-to-1. Do you guys have a sense? Are there more men or more women? There are more female students here at GCC. Again, I haven't looked at the numbers in a little while. Let's say it's 60-40. 60% women, 40% men. So what I could do, I could try to force the sample that I choose to be 60% women and 40% men. So maybe I'll have two different hats, right? And I'm going to pull 60 names from the hat with all the women's names in it and 40 names from the hat with all the men's names in it. That is called quota sampling because I'm forcing the sample to be representative of some quota, okay? Turns out that's not very good because then again, I'm making choices and I don't want to make any choices. The best way to pick a sample is to do it randomly. Everybody has a chance of being in it. Just randomly pick names. The fact is, if I have this big hat with all the men and women here at GCC in it, and I pull 100 of them, well, there's a pretty good chance that it's going to be about 60 women and 40 men, right? If that's what the whole distribution in the hat actually is. But we don't go out of our way to force it to be anything. Okay, let's go to Patty for stratified. Okay, stratified sampling and quota sampling can kind of be similar to each other. And we're going to ask you some questions in the group activity in just a little bit, where it asks you to identify. And sometimes it's not clear. You could justify that it's a quota sample. You could justify that it's stratified sampling. So the stratified sampling, same kind of idea. Actually, maybe now that I think of it, I think what I described before was stratified sampling, where I separated men and women. I randomly pulled out of the hat. And so, okay, so that's stratified sampling. So let me take it back. Quota sampling is where instead of pulling out of a hat, I'm going to say, okay, I want to make sure that I pick 6 females and 4 males. I'm going to make sure that we fill the quota. But then I'm actually going to look at the names and I'll say, okay, we're going to pick 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 females. But I have made a choice here, right? I have chosen 6 people. I looked around the room and I made a choice. And I really shouldn't be making any kind of choice when it comes to sampling. And I'll look around the room and I'll pick 4 guys. And so that's what that's what quota sampling is, where I will pick to make sure it's a 60-40, but I'm picking, and that's very bad. All right? Okay, so the bullet point summary of these 4 different methods: convenience, simple random, quota, and stratified. Which one is the best one? It's a simple random sampling. That is the best one. So as soon as I hear some advertisement on the radio says, 4 out of 5 dentists think that this toothpaste is the best, I want to know, how did you pick those dentists? Was it a random collection of dentists you asked, or were these dentists paid by you to be a part of this sample? And I think it makes a big difference, the answer to that question. So simple random sample is the way to go. Okay, part G is a very tricky concept. Let's go to Danny. G. Okay, sampling frame. So who had a chance to be part of the survey where I asked you guys your preference between day and evening classes? Was you guys, right? Was there anybody else that had a chance? No? So everybody in my class had a chance, right? Did everybody in my class participate in that survey? Yes? Melissa, you have any idea what we're talking about right now? Did Melissa participate in our survey? No. So I don't mean to pick on you, but I'm actually thrilled that you came just a few minutes late today, because it is true that the sampling frame is any student enrolled in Ian's class So anybody that had a chance to be in the survey, that's what the sampling frame is. So everybody enrolled in my classes had a chance to be in the survey, but the sample wasn't even everybody enrolled, right? The sample was the 20 students who were here when I asked the question. There are several people who are absent today. They're in the sampling frame. They had a chance to participate, but happened they didn't. They're not in the sample. So it's a really tricky concept. So I'm going to draw a picture. I'm hoping this kind of illustrates what's going on. So here is, let's see, we'll squeeze it in over here. Okay, right there is the entire GCC student body. All 2,000 plus students are in that box. Here is the people that are in one of my classes. And then here is the people who participated. That is, that little circle is the people who were actually here today and took this survey, okay? So this kind of diagram, I just want to make sure we can identify what the different regions represent. What kind of person is out there? A GCC student who's not in any of my classes, right? Which represents the vast majority of GCC students. Can somebody, again, not to pick on Melissa, but somebody name somebody who is that green dot right there? This is Melissa, right? Or somebody who's absent today, right? You look around, you see some of your classmates are not here. So they are my students, but they didn't happen to be in the survey. They weren't here today to participate. So that small purple thing, that's the 20 of you guys who said you prefer day classes. And now let's tie all this stuff into the words that we just saw. I've got 3 regions here. One of them is the sampling frame, and one of them is the sample. Can you talk with your neighbors and try to figure out which of those 3 regions is the sampling frame and which one is the sample? Okay, let's come back together. The sample is usually the easier one to identify. The sample is the people who actually participated. What color was the sample in this case? It's purple. Participants were the sample. Participants are always the sample. The sampling frame is a set of people who had a chance to be in the survey. Maybe they were, maybe they weren't, but they had a chance to participate. What color is the sampling frame? It's blue. This right here is the sampling frame. Understand the difference? The sample is the people who actually participated. The sampling frame, anybody who had a chance. The vast majority of GCC students had no chance to be part of my study because they aren't registered for any of my classes. And that's a problem. That's one of the weaknesses of the study that I just conducted here. Suppose that instead of doing this convenience sample, which we did here, it was convenient to just ask you guys, suppose we did that simple random sample. So I have a list of names of every GCC student, and I'm just going to pick out random names, 20 people. What color is the sampling frame in that case? There's 3 sets up here. Who has a chance of being in the survey if I do it this list way? Everybody. So what color is the sampling frame? It's black. That's what it should be. The sampling frame should be the entire population. If there's some people that don't have any chance of being in the study from the get-go, that's flawed. There's a real problem if you are just automatically right off the bat excluding some people for whatever reason. And so that's what this thing up here says. Ideally, the sampling frame would be the same as the target population. It is very far from that in my evening classes example. Okay, let's look at H. I think we're up to Stephanie. Okay, so we're going to think about this sampling proportion. Little n is the number of people who were actually part of the study. So how many people participated in our study? About 20. So we'll put this here, 20. Divided by capital N. We said n value is the size of the entire population, roughly 2,000. And so oftentimes this is given as a percentage. If you type this in, how do we get that cancels? That cancels. I think it's just 1%. So by polling 20 people out of 2,000, I polled 1%, roughly 1% of the GCC population. So is 1% enough? I don't know. Take a statistics class. We're just spending 1 day on statistics. Like there's a lot of questions you have to answer to decide, how many people you should poll. Oftentimes the number of people you need to poll is much smaller than you might expect. If you get a good cross-section of the Massachusetts population, polling 1,000 people might be good. It might be enough. Massachusetts has, I should know this, are we about 5 million? How many people in Massachusetts? Sounds good. Let's call it 5 million. I might be completely making this up, but it turns out, again, if you poll a diverse cross-section of those 5 million people, 1,000 people might be good enough to get a sense of how Massachusetts voters are going to vote or which flavor of ice cream we really like, okay? So it's not so much about having like the raw number. You certainly don't need half of the population to be part of the study, but it really is about that idea of the simple random sampling. If you have a good sample of people, you can get good information from it. All right, so let's pause right here. I'm going to pause the video while I pull up something else. So just in case you want to check this out at home, there's a link up there you can take a look at, but we're going to pause the video. Okay, so we saw 3 different polls, and in those 3 polls, Romney was ahead, Romney was behind, Romney was tied with the president. So there's a problem, right? They can't all be accurate. I mean, like at this point, if we just went out and conducted an election today, somebody would win, and it wouldn't be both people, and it wouldn't be tied, right? Okay, and then that last clip we heard, the young woman said that they were oversampling in some of these polls where the president is up by 5%. They were oversampling Democrats. Okay, so there's that word sampling that we talked about today, right? And here's what we can, yeah, what does it mean to say that they were? Yeah, so what was she saying they were doing wrong in that example? Yeah, they polled more Democrats. They oversampled from the Democrats. And so if you oversample from the Democrats, then the statistics you get will be slanted towards the Democratic candidate. And so she said, in this poll where Obama is up by 5%, turns out if you look at the internals, that's what she said, if you actually look at who they were polling. So I really like, I'm not saying I like Fox, but I'm just saying that I really like what she's saying, look at the internals and look at who they are polling. And that's kind of the heart of what we're talking about today. The data is only as good as the sample that you pick. And if you pick a bad sample, the data is, as Stuart says, worthless. Melissa. Yeah, so have you guys, yeah, it's a good point that the percentages oftentimes don't add up to 100. There are other candidates, yes. And yeah, so maybe there are other candidates or undecideds or something. Yeah, so there could be some reason for it to not add up to 100%. It's a good question. So I guess here's what I'll say. You know, in terms of these polls, again, this is me kind of speaking off the record. So John Stewart said they were oftentimes worthless. I think they're worse than that. I think they are harmful to this democratic process that we're engaged in. If on November the 5th, it turns out that one person, according to the polls, has an insurmountable lead, well, voter turnout is going to go way down on November 6th. On the actual day that matters, if people think that one candidate is just a shoo-in to win this thing, a lot of people are just not even going to bother going out and voting. Why should I spend my time? Why should I spend my Tuesday afternoon or Tuesday evening? It's a long day at work, long day at school. It's clear that blank is going to win according to the polls. Don't even vote. So I think that is very harmful to this democratic process. I think that depending on which network you watch and whether they're skewed right or left, they will pick the polls, they will cherry pick the data, as they were saying, that makes their candidate look better. And I think that is also very harmful. And so,
leading to is there are so many people that vote insincerely.
Mhm.
So if you see like their candidate gonna win because of some data that's not real,
might change your vote based on bad data. Absolutely. Okay, so I think that it's harmful. I also think that, sure, it's possible to get some accurate information about the state of our election at this moment, but really what difference does it make? Why are people so interested in knowing how the country is thinking about voting right now? I mean, isn't there's still, like, the election's not now. Election's in like 3 weeks from now, and we still have a couple more presidential debates to happen and more issues to come out. And I just don't get it. I don't understand why there's so much energy spent. Like if you watch any of these kind of news networks right now, you'll just pull, 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 pull. And I just don't get it. I feel like it's just, yeah, maybe. What's that, Kristen? I do feel like a lot of these networks are trying to influence you. I think that that's part of what the polls accomplish. Mike?
I was going to say it helps the politicians know what state they have to campaign on.
Maybe. So yeah, but I think it's a good point. If there's good data, then maybe the presidents would have a sense. Maybe you've heard the phrase battleground state. What is a battleground state? It's one of these that's kind of still up in the air, and one of them maybe needs to win such and such a state to have a chance in terms of the electoral college. I do think that the polls might help the candidates decide, okay, which way is Massachusetts leaning, which way is Pennsylvania leaning, and I think that's fine. And they run their own polls. Leave us alone with the polls. Like they can run their polls and get their information and then decide how to campaign and which states should be campaigned in harder and which not at all. I agree with you. They should have that information. But I just think it's detrimental to us. Melissa. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that I think part of this is also that we're now in the era of a 24-hour news cycle. Right? We got these round-the-clock news stations. We didn't used to have that. Not too long ago, we didn't have that. There was the 6 o'clock news. Everything that happened in a day was crammed into that 60-minute period, and that was it. But now you got to fill 24 hours a day on a whole slew of different news networks. So let's go make up some stuff and have these talking heads describe, you know, this poll is good and this poll is bad. And I just don't think it's worse than being worthless. I think it's harmful. Okay, let's keep going here with I. So where are we now? Is it Mike? Okay, so the word parameter is just the piece of information you're trying to get. It's usually a number. So for example, the president of GCC is probably looking for something like what percentage of GCC students prefer evening classes? That's well, so yeah, so is it 50 or more? Is it a small number? Is it a big number? But that's probably what we're after here. So what percentage of GCC students prefer evening classes? In theory, the only way to know that number is to ask every single one of our 2,000 students, okay? So the parameter is oftentimes unknowable. We can't get all that information. So instead, we look for this idea called statistic. So I said we were studying statistics. Here's what that word actually means. It's an estimate of the population parameter. I want to know what percentage of all GCC students prefer night classes. I'm going to estimate that thing with a statistic by asking the 20 people right in front of me. So we estimate that parameter by carrying out a survey. It applies to any numeric information gained from a survey. So how many people out of the 20 preferred evening classes? It was 1. So I don't know if this is on the next page where it asks for it. Yes, 1 out of 20 people prefer evening classes. And 1 out of 20 is 5%. So I go back to our president. I say, Bob, 5% of GCC students prefer evening classes. So is that 5% the parameter or the statistic? One out of 20. Am I wrong? It's 5. Okay. So so is this a parameter or a statistic? So the two different things, the parameter is the number that relates to the entire population. The statistic is the number that relates to the smaller sample. This is a statistic, okay? What's that? Because it's an estimate, yes, yes. Okay, and for what it's worth, I don't know if this will help you remember, but the word parameter starts with P and it applies to population. The word statistic starts with an S and it applies to sample, okay? Convenient. Lucas.
Do we, like, because are you comments that certain people aren't here for the survey? So there's like a error.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So sometimes you hear the, like on the polls, it'll be like Obama has a 47% plus or minus 3. They build in this kind of error. So there's a few different errors we're going to talk about right down here. So we're coming to that very soon. Okay, part K is just a loose definition of the word statistics. It's the science of working with data. So we are studying statistics right now by looking at the data we got. 1 out of 20 people prefer evening classes. Okay, let's talk about bias. Kristen? Okay, so for example, in the clip we just watched, that woman was saying that the poll was biased because they oversampled from the Democrats. They asked too many Democrats. They asked too great a proportion of Democrats. And so that was a bias.
What are you talking about? It isn't about the Democratic Party. It isn't about the Republican Party. It's about the cocktail party.
All right. Apparently that was playing behind the scenes. Okay. I think that probably came out on the recording. All right. Okay, so let's go here to Laura. Suppose.
Suppose I was to find the average height of all adult workers in the US. Is this the parameter?
Okay, so again, parameter refers to the whole population. Statistic refers to small population or small sample. Is this parameter or a statistic? The keyword here is all. It's a parameter, right? The US population is a big population. We're looking at all women, let's say about 150 million women. This is a parameter. Would it be easy or hard to actually get the heights of all 150 million females here in the US and then average them? That would be very hard, right? Very challenging to do that. So instead, we'll grab a sample. We could grab the sample of the 10 women or so that are in this room right now. We could just get the average heights of the 10 women that are here and just try to generalize. Say, oh, okay, the U.S. woman on average is about 5'6". Okay, go ahead, Laura. Okay, so if I just look at the women in the WNBA and I get their average heights, is that a parameter or a statistic? It's a statistic because we're using a small group of people to get information about a big group of people, all right? Well, that's the problem, right? Okay, so this is a bad idea. All right, so why is this going to be misleading? Okay, so they are, on average, the women in the WNBA are much taller than the typical woman, right? Okay, so this is a bias. So why is it biased? WNBA women are taller than average. I'd say that's probably an understatement. So what I should have done was maybe take a list of 150 million adult women here in the US and randomly pick 300 names, completely random, find their heights, average them. That will give me a pretty decent average for estimate for the height of the average American woman. But this is a very, very bad way to do things. And it's clear it's biased, right? Unfortunately, sometimes the surveys that you hear the results of are biased in ways that aren't nearly as obvious as this. So bias is one of these kinds of things that sometimes is lurking behind the scenes, and you oftentimes have to kind of peek around a corner to really find it. Patty? Yes. Yeah, I mean, we use a statistic to estimate, so yes. Yeah, the word estimate is a key that it's a statistic that we're looking for. Okay, so we're back around to Nicole for M.
Selection bias from the choices or not to exclude particular characteristics.
Okay, so this WNBA example was an example of selection bias. I did not select a good group of women to generalize to the US population. The choice of my sample had a built-in tendency to overestimate the height of the average woman, right? So in our case, I guess I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but this was selection bias in my WNBA survey. I selected a group of people that were not representative. I selected too many people that had this one characteristic of being taller than average. Okay, we'll go to Mary for participation. Okay, so so when you get a survey in the mail, probably most people are just going to throw it away, but some people will fill it out and send it back, and that's fine, right? But it turns out that if you don't have everybody, like I can do my simple random sample, and so let's say that oh, I don't know. So let's say that I do I'm interested in knowing how important religion is to the average American. So I go out, I get a simple random list of the names of like all the residents of Franklin County, and I'm just going to pick 500 names at random. I can't do any better than that, and I'm going to mail out 500 of these things, you know, on a scale of 1 to 10, how important is religion to you, okay? All right, so we have a sense, you know, like we can't assume that everybody's going to respond. But do you have a sense of what kind of people might be interested in responding to a survey about how important religion is to them? People who are quite religious, I mean, like, right, if you're really, really religious, if faith is very important to you, might you be maybe more inclined to say, oh, absolutely, I'm going to mail this thing back. I need to make sure that I'm represented, as opposed to somebody who's like, well, you know, I don't really practice. You know, I used to do something when I was younger, but I'm just going to throw this away, right? And if it's not so important to that person, they might be more likely to just throw the thing away. And so all of a sudden, I have these results that aren't accurate, because maybe the people who are very much interested in their faith have a greater tendency of responding to the survey. Morgan.
I feel like people that
That's a great point. So if you have somebody who's atheist who believes there is no God or God's out there, they might be quite passionate about it, quite vocal about it, and might want to get their voices heard. I suppose in an ideal world, the people who are quite religious and the people who are quite anti-religious would respond in equal numbers, but this is another assumption we'd have to make, right? And I'm not saying who would respond more, I'm just saying that the people who respond might have a built-in tendency to be on one extreme or the other. And we really can't hope for this idea of, oh, everything will perfectly cancel and it'll be fine. So it's a great point. I still think we've got participation bias here based on the two extremes. Melissa? Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. Right. So this is a really good hardcore statistics question. Like I said, we're spending one class on statistics, and that's all. You can get a bachelor's degree, you can get a PhD in statistics. So like, great question, and there are people who know a lot about that kind of thing. So hopefully the folks who publish these national results are out there with the master's degrees and PhDs in statistics, and they know, how to do it right. Okay, so let's come back here. Last example, and then we'll move on. Where Grace, suppose.
What they want to know how prevalent tax fraud is. If they send out surveys asking people how many people tax fraud last year, if this survey said this,
Which one? Participation bias, right? The people who respond to my survey are going to have a built-in tendency to probably not have committed tax fraud last year, or maybe they lie about it and don't want to say they committed tax fraud last year. So again, I could come up with the greatest sample in the world. I could ask a really, really random group of people, hey, did you commit tax fraud last year? I can't trust my results because of this idea of participation. That's a good point. If I don't get the people that are in jail because maybe they've committed and gotten caught for tax fraud. So in theory, my random list of names will have everybody who's in jail as well. And if, like if I get people that are in jail and people that aren't in jail, as long as we're representative of the population, should be okay. But it's a good point. If the folks that are in prison are excluded, I might accidentally decrease the true amount of tax fraud that's out there because I'm not talking to the people who committed it and got caught. Yeah, Melissa. Mm-hmm. Right. 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 Yeah, and those phone surveys are some of the worst out there in terms of reliability because oftentimes people are really annoyed to get that phone call. But again, if it's a phone call about how important your faith is and it's either really important to you or really not important, you might be more likely to participate as opposed to somebody who says, I'm having dinner, leave me alone. Okay, last thing, and then you guys will try this activity here. We'll go to N for Tim. What do we think? I just look out this window and record the gender of the next 20 people. Probably going to be different results, right? And so this is what Lucas had asked about before. There's just error built in because, the people that you happen to pick, they're part of the study. And so if I hadn't picked you 20 folks, but 20 other folks, maybe Greg isn't in the class, and now it's 0 out of 20 people think that night classes are better. So there's always this chance error. You can't avoid it. It happens when you're asking a small group of people and trying to get information about a big population. It is what it is. That's why we see this kind of plus or minus 3% on the polls. All right, so here's what you guys are going to do. There are 5 statistical surveys down below. Each of them is just a paragraph. So what you're going to do is you're going to read the paragraph, And they're going to answer all these questions. Questions say, what's the target population? What's the parameter? What's the sampling frame? All of these questions just trying to reinforce all the vocabulary today. And again, if we could just go with the one quick bullet point summary of today, whenever you hear any data coming out from some survey, before you buy into what they are selling, just start thinking about a lot of the issues that we've talked about today. That's the point of today, okay? All right, so I'll walk around and answer questions if we have them, but work together and see how far you can get on these 5 examples.